Let me paint you a picture of the people at the center of this story. Daniel was the golden boy, 6 feet tall with sandy brown hair that he constantly ran his fingers through when he was thinking, and an easy smile that could disarm anyone. He wore confidence like a well-tailored jacket, had this infectious laugh that filled entire rooms, and possessed the kind of natural charisma that made professors remember his name and strangers trust him instantly. He was studying business but dreamed of starting his own tech company, always sketching ideas on napkins and talking about changing the world. Emma was his perfect counterpart, petite at barely 5'4", with dark chocolate hair that she often twisted into messy buns, secured with whatever pen she happened to be holding. Her green eyes were flecked with gold and seemed to hold entire conversations behind them, and she had this habit of biting her lower lip when she was concentrating. She was pursuing her master's in literature, could quote Virginia Woolf and Maya Angelou with equal passion, and had an intellect that could cut through any argument with surgical precision. She was the kind of person who carried worn paperback books in her oversized canvas bags and somehow made philosophy sound like poetry at crowded parties. They say some secrets are meant to stay buried, but when love refuses to follow the rules of friendship, when your heart decides to beat for someone it shouldn't, you realize that some truths demand to be told. This is mine. I never planned to fall in love with Daniel's ex-girlfriend. Hell, I never planned to see Emma again after she and my best friend broke up 3 years ago. But life has a twisted sense of humor, and sometimes it throws you into situations that test everything you thought you knew about loyalty, friendship, and love. Daniel and I had been inseparable since college. We shared everything: our dreams, our failures, our late-night conversations about life. When he started dating Emma during our senior year, I was genuinely happy for him. She was brilliant, funny, and had this way of lighting up a room that made everyone gravitate toward her. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't notice her. Really notice her. There were moments when our eyes would meet across a crowded party and something electric would pass between us. Moments when she'd laugh at my jokes a little too long, or when our hands would accidentally brush while reaching for the same book. I told myself it was nothing. She was Daniel's girlfriend, and I was his best friend. That was the natural order of things. When they broke up after graduation, it wasn't dramatic or explosive. They just grew apart, wanted different things. Daniel took a job in Seattle, Emma stayed in Chicago for grad school, and I moved to New York to chase my own dreams. We all scattered like leaves in the wind, and I thought that was the end of that chapter. For 3 years, I didn't see Emma once. Daniel and I kept in touch, though less frequently as we built our separate lives. He dated other people, seemed happy. I dated too, but somehow no one ever measured up to this impossible standard I'd created in my head. A standard that looked suspiciously like her. Then came the wedding invitation. My college roommate Marcus was getting married in Chicago, and suddenly all of us were going to be in the same place for the first time since graduation. Daniel texted me excitedly about the reunion. I felt that familiar mixture of anticipation and dread, wondering if she'd be there. She was. I saw her before she saw me, standing by the bar in a midnight blue dress that made her look like she'd stepped out of a dream. 3 years had only made her more beautiful, more confident. She'd cut her hair shorter, and there were these subtle lines around her eyes when she smiled that spoke of experiences I hadn't been part of. When our eyes met across that wedding reception, the world seemed to stop. Not in a cheesy romantic comedy way, but in that profound, terrifying way when you realize your life is about to change direction. We talked for hours that night, about everything and nothing, about the paths we'd taken, the dreams we'd chased, the people we'd become. Daniel was there too, of course, mingling with other friends, catching up on old times. He seemed genuinely happy to see Emma, like an old friend from a different lifetime. No awkwardness, no lingering feelings. Just two people who had shared something meaningful once upon a time. But between Emma and me, there was something else entirely. Something that felt dangerous and inevitable and absolutely wrong. We exchanged numbers that night. Just to keep in touch, we told ourselves. Just as friends. The texting started innocently enough. Random thoughts throughout the day, funny memes, questions about work. But gradually, the conversations became deeper, more intimate. We'd talk until 2 in the morning about our fears, our ambitions, the books that made us cry. She told me about her struggles in graduate school, the pressure she felt to prove herself. I told her about the loneliness of chasing success in a city that never slept. We both knew what was happening, but neither of us was brave enough to name it. The first time we met in person after the wedding was supposedly accidental. I was in Chicago for work. She suggested coffee. We told ourselves we were just catching up, but we both dressed a little more carefully that morning. Both felt that flutter of anticipation that had nothing to do with friendship. Sitting across from her in that little cafe, watching her hands wrap around her coffee cup, listening to her laugh at my terrible jokes, I felt something I'd been suppressing for years finally break free. This wasn't just attraction or nostalgia. This was love, real and terrifying and completely inappropriate. "I've missed this," she said suddenly, looking directly into my eyes. "Talking to someone who really gets it." I should have changed the subject. Should have made some joke about old times. Instead, I heard myself saying, "I've missed you." The silence that followed was charged with everything we weren't saying, everything we couldn't say. We started meeting regularly after that, always in secret, always with elaborate excuses. I'd tell Daniel I was working late when I was actually having dinner with Emma. She'd tell her friends she was studying when she was actually walking through Grant Park with me, talking about everything except the obvious truth hanging between us. The guilt was eating me alive. Every time Daniel called, every time he mentioned Emma casually in conversation, I felt like a fraud. He trusted me completely, never suspected that his best friend and his ex-girlfriend were developing something that neither of us could control. The first time Emma and I kissed, we were sitting on her apartment balcony watching the sunrise after talking all night. It wasn't planned, wasn't dramatic. She was mid-sentence, telling me about a paper she was writing, when she suddenly stopped and looked at me with this expression of wonder and terror. "We shouldn't," she whispered, but she was already leaning toward me. "I know," I whispered back, but I was already kissing her. It was like coming home to a place I'd never been, like finding a piece of myself I didn't know was missing. And at the same time, it was the most terrifying moment of my life because I knew there was no going back. We tried to stay away from each other after that. Emma deleted my number. I threw myself into work with desperate intensity. But 2 weeks later, she was texting me at midnight, and I was catching the first flight to Chicago the next morning. We told ourselves we'd keep it physical, no emotions involved. That lasted exactly one night. By morning, we were planning our future together, talking about her moving to New York after graduation, about building something real and lasting. But always, hanging over everything, was Daniel. He started dating someone new around that time, a lawyer named Sarah who seemed perfect for him. He was happy, really happy, and somehow that made everything worse. It would have been easier if he was miserable, if I could tell myself I was somehow doing him a favor. But seeing him genuinely content made me realize how much I was betraying not just his trust, but our entire friendship. Emma and I lasted 6 months in secret. 6 months of stolen weekends, of elaborate lies, of loving someone so completely while living in constant fear of discovery. We made plans to tell Daniel together, to explain that sometimes love doesn't follow the rules, that we never meant for this to happen. But life had other plans. Daniel showed up at my apartment unannounced one Saturday morning. I was still in bed, and Emma was in the shower. He had coffee and bagels, wanting to surprise me with breakfast like we used to do in college. He had news about a promotion, about his relationship with Sarah getting serious. I heard the shower turn off as Daniel was settling into my kitchen chair. Emma's laugh drifted through the apartment as she called my name, asking if I wanted coffee. There was something so domestic, so natural about it, that for a split second I forgot we were hiding. Daniel's face when Emma walked out of my bedroom in my t-shirt was something I'll never forget. Confusion, then recognition, then something that looked like physical pain crossing his features. Not jealousy or anger, but genuine hurt at the deception. "How long?" was all he said. The truth spilled out of us in fragments. The wedding, the months of secret meetings, the love we couldn't deny. Emma cried as she tried to explain that she'd never meant to hurt him, that what they'd had was beautiful, but belonged to the past. I stood there feeling like the worst person in the world, watching my best friend realize that the two people he trusted most had been lying to his face for months. He didn't yell, didn't storm out dramatically. He just sat there for what felt like hours, processing. Finally, he looked at both of us and said, "I need time to think about this." Then he left, taking our friendship with him. The next few weeks were the hardest of my life. Daniel wouldn't answer my calls, wouldn't respond to texts. Mutual friends started asking questions about why we weren't hanging out anymore. Emma was devastated, blaming herself for destroying two important relationships in her life. We almost broke up during those weeks. The weight of what our love had cost seemed too heavy to bear. But every time we tried to walk away from each other, we realized that what we'd found was too rare, too real to sacrifice. 3 months later, Daniel called me. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice careful and measured. "About what you said, about not planning for this to happen." I held my breath, afraid to hope. Emma and I broke up because we weren't right for each other long term. We wanted different things, had different dreams. I can see that now, with some distance. He paused. "But you and Emma, I've been watching you two at parties for years. Even when she was my girlfriend, I could see something there. Something you were both trying to ignore." I didn't know what to say. "I'm not going to lie and say I'm not hurt," he continued. "The secrecy, the lying, that hurt more than anything else, because it meant you didn't trust me enough to be honest." "Daniel, But," he interrupted, "I've been thinking about what real friendship means. And maybe it means wanting the people you love to be happy, even when that happiness is complicated." We met for coffee the next day. It was awkward, painful, but real. Daniel told us that he could see how much we loved each other, how right we seemed together. He said he understood why we'd hidden it, but that if we wanted any chance of salvaging our friendships, complete honesty going forward was non-negotiable. It took time. Months of careful conversations, of rebuilding trust, of learning new boundaries. But gradually, Daniel became not just accepting of our relationship, but genuinely supportive. He walked Emma down the aisle at our wedding 2 years later, and his speech about love sometimes requiring the courage to break your own rules brought down the house. Emma and I have been married for 4 years now. Daniel is still one of my closest friends, and he and Sarah double date with us regularly. What started as betrayal became somehow a deeper understanding of what love and friendship really mean. But I won't lie to you. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I thought we'd lost everything. Moments when the guilt almost destroyed what we were building together. Moments when I wondered if love was worth the price of loyalty. Looking back now, I realize that some of life's most beautiful chapters begin with the scariest decisions. When your heart pulls you towards something that terrifies you, something that doesn't fit into the neat categories you've created for your life, maybe that's exactly where you need to go. Love isn't always convenient. It doesn't always follow the rules we set for it. Sometimes it asks you to risk everything you think you know about right and wrong, about loyalty and friendship, about who you're supposed to be. But when you find someone who sees your soul clearly, who makes you brave enough to become the person you're meant to be, who loves you through your worst decisions and celebrates your best moments, that's worth fighting for. Even when fighting for it means disappointing people you care about. Even when it means admitting you're not the person everyone thought you were. Emma is sleeping next to me as I record this story. Tomorrow is Daniel and Sarah's wedding anniversary, and we're all going out to celebrate. In a few months, Emma and I will welcome our first child, a little girl we've decided to name Hope. Daniel will be her godfather, because sometimes the most broken things can be mended into something even stronger than before. If you're listening to this and struggling with your own impossible choice, your own secret love, your own fear of disappointing people, I want you to know that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing love anyway, even when the path forward isn't clear, even when you can't see how the story ends. Your story matters. Your truth matters. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust that love knows better than fear. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that we're all just human beings trying to figure out how to love and be loved, please subscribe to Top Life Stories. Share your own truth with someone who needs to hear it. Because in a world that often feels divided, stories like these remind us that we're all connected by the universal experience of loving imperfectly, of making mistakes, and of finding our way back to each other. Thank you for listening to mine.